So without further ado, I want to introduce our featured speaker tonight. She was one of the top immigration attorneys in Silicon Valley. She is very knowledgeable, and she is passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed. So let's hear it for Nadia Yacoub.
Thanks, Rob. Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. If I'm not speaking loudly, just let me know, raise your hands, and I'll speak up. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I've been practicing immigration law now for 16 years. I started when I was 12, just in case you were doing the math. So yeah, it's been 16 years I've been practicing immigration law, and actually it's very personal to me because the way my family came is my dad and his brother were international students in the U.S., and when my uncle graduated from Berkeley, he was sponsored by McDonnell Douglas for an H-1B, which we'll discuss tonight. And after his H-1B, they sponsored him for a green card, and then he got his permanent residence, then he became a citizen, and then he sponsored all 8 of his brothers and sisters. And so that's how I got to come to the United States. I mean, it took 12 years, the process can be slow, but it definitely works, and I'm a real believer in the system. So, and I really, understand how it's just can be a bit of a roller coaster. So I really enjoy helping people through it. For you guys as entrepreneurs, first of all, I want to congratulate you on being so, forward thinking and taking initiative by coming out here and finding out about visa options. I do want to tell you, if you are confused, or if you're feeling like, wow, this is complicated stuff, you're not alone. The U.S. Supreme Court actually has said that the immigration statute is the most complex statute in the United States. So it's very, very complicated how it works. So, I know that there's a lot of discussion boards. I know there's a lot of forums. Every time I talk to someone, it's like, well, I read this and I read that. And I do think, in order to cut through all that noise, it does help you if you have a good advocate, a good lawyer working with you, right? So they really understand what your goals are, what you've got going for you, what your constraints are, and can help you come up with the right strategy for you, right? Okay, so let me give you an overview of what we'll be discussing. So we'll just start by, if you're an entrepreneur and you are considering the United States as a place to either expand or found a business, what are your ways to come check out the U.S., right? What are the visa options that are best? Then I'll just go into the various temporary employment-based visas. After that, I'll talk about the new International Entrepreneur Parole Program. This just came out at the end of August. It's not yet the law, but I'll tell you a little bit about what it is right now as it's proposed. It's, of course, not the final version, but we'll go over that. I'm going to spend one slide really very quickly on how to get a green card, right? So there's just about 5 different ways that are the most common how to get permanent residence, if that's something you're interested in. Touch very briefly on immigration reform. With Trump, that's like a wall. And then with Clinton, I think she's learned from President Obama's experience, which is he couldn't get anything done for 8 years, right? I mean, that was one of his, definitely, an important part of his campaign in 2008. And like nothing, very little has changed, unfortunately. I'll talk briefly about some things you want to be careful about while you're in the United States, or if things happen abroad, how they could impact your eligibility for the visa. And then that's when we'll open up for questions and answers. Okay? So let's start with the visitor visa. So you want to come into the United States, you want to check out whether this is the place you want to found your business. Visitor visa is the best option for you. You are not allowed to work, okay, when you're here on the visitor visa. You can enter 2 ways. You either have a B1, B2 visa, or you enter on the visa waiver program, and that is you're a national of a country where you don't need to get a visa. There's about 30 odd countries, like most countries in Europe, Japan, Peru, I think, is one. It goes back and forth. Argentina, or sorry, Chile. Sometimes the countries go on the list and then they're taken off. But the bottom line is you can enter as a B1, B2, or on the visa waiver program. Now, if you enter on the visa waiver program, you're allowed to stay for 90 days. No extensions are permitted. The only exception to that rule is if you've had like a serious medical emergency or you marry a US citizen, okay? And then for those of you who enter on the B1, you're allowed to stay for 6 months normally. Sometimes the officers will give you less, but you usually will be given 6 months, and you can even extend it by another 6 months if you want. I've got clients, when I used to work in New York, clients, and this was 15 years ago when travel was a little more complicated, and people from Japan just didn't want to fly back. It's a long flight, and so they would just stay for a year trying to figure out if New York was where they wanted to open their sushi bar or whatever it was. So that's the visitor visa. Now, just so you know, if you don't have one, let's say you're on a student visa. Are any of you students here, F1s? Okay, are any of you on another visa, like an H-1B? Okay, so maybe you've never applied for a B1, but if you do need to apply for a B1, the key thing is to show you plan to go back home. I'll be very honest, single men they're the hardest case, right? Because that's the demographic that tends to overstay in the United States. Anyway, but the key thing is just remember when you're coming through at the airport, you're not coming into work, you're not coming in to look for work, you're coming to explore business opportunities, okay? So that's the visitor visa. Let's talk about studying in the US, because that is a terrific way to test the waters in the United States. The reason why is because, one, you're making your contacts while you're studying. You can work in the summers, so long as you are in a program that is towards a degree. So you can't come here to study English for a year and get work authorization. It has to be towards a bachelor's or master's or a PhD, okay? And what's great is when you graduate, you get 1 year of work authorization. And if you are a graduate of a STEM field, so science, technology, engineering, or math, you get an extra 2 years. So for these 1 year Master of Science programs, whether it's in chemistry or physics or engineering, if you can do a 1 year master's, you could get 3 years of work authorization. So it's very expensive to study in the US. Average is like $60,000, but in a way it pays off because you can work. Assuming you can get a job, but most STEM graduates are getting jobs because that's the fields where we don't have enough US workers. So that's a terrific way to get to know and figure out the US a bit. All right, so let's just jump now to the temporary employment-based visas. I'm going to start with the H-1B. Sounds like we have quite a few in here, right? So this might be a little bit, boring for you. So have some pizza. So let me jump in for the others though. So what are the requirements? There are 4 main requirements, and I will discuss them more in each following slide. The first is that the position must require a bachelor's degree, okay? So you can't be like a fitness instructor or a hotel concierge, even if it's at the Four Seasons, or a tour guide, right? It has to be a position that requires some level, it's called a specialty occupation. And it means it requires a bachelor's degree. But not only does the position require the bachelor's degree, but you, as the prospective H-1B worker, have the degree in the right field. Okay, so the perfect example is, let's say you are applying for a job as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, but you have a bachelor's in art history from Princeton. There's just no match. So the position requires a bachelor's, you have a bachelor's, but it's not in the right field, right? So So you need a bachelor's degree, and it needs to be in the field in which you will work. You can also combine work and study. So for a lot of people, they'll do like 2 years of school. There's a formula. You can add in years of work experience to create in total a bachelor's degree. Okay, the next issue, and I'm going to talk about that more in the following slide, is you have to be paid the right salary. Okay, this is to protect U.S. workers. So they want to make sure you are paid the prevailing wage or the actual wage for your job, whatever is higher, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The next element that is really important for entrepreneurs is that this is, the H-1B is really for people who are going to be employees. So it used to be you could create your own company and sponsor yourself for an H-1B. That's just not allowed anymore, okay? You have to be employed by a company. Also, if you start a company and you're one of the founders, right, you cannot sponsor yourself. So even if, let's say, unless you do not have a controlling shareholder interest. So if you have like a minority interest, 10%, 15%, it shouldn't be a problem. But if you have like 40% interest, 50% ownership interest, you cannot be sponsored, okay, for the H-1B. So that can be a real problem for those of you who want to start your own company. This visa is not the right one for you. The last thing is that there are significant government filing fees that the employer has to pay. You are not allowed to pay them, okay? And that also includes the legal fees. So the employer has to pay all the fees associated with the H-1B. Okay, so let's talk about the prevailing wage versus the actual wage. Whatever is higher, that's what you will need to be paid, okay? And what is a prevailing wage? Well, it's a wage that the Department of Labor sets for the area in which you will work, for the position you will hold, okay? And let me just show you how this works. Let's see if this works. I'm going to take us. All right. So here, oh, it's not showing. Hold on. Oh, well, there's a website where I could show you how to, if you go on the Department of Labor's website, let's see if this would work. Okay, it's not working. So anyway, there's a website, and I can email that to you after, where you can punch in your state and then your county, and then you can put in a keyword for your job occupation. Let's say software engineer, and it'll tell you what is the salary for you. Okay, so that's really important. That's the prevailing wage, and that's important for you if you're looking for a job with a young company. So even if you're not a founder of a startup, but you want to go work for a startup, you have to make sure that you have that salary discussion, right? Then, or if it's the actual wage, whichever is higher. So what is actual wage? It's whatever the company is paying to all the other U.S. workers in your occupation. So Google, Facebook, Yahoo, they all pay above market, right? And so if you're an H-1B worker, you have to be paid the same as the U.S. workers. They can't pay you the prevailing wage if that's lower. Okay, so that's the salary requirement. The next requirement that I was talking about is that there has to be an employer-employee relationship. Okay, that doesn't mean that you have to be like at the office every day from 9 to 5. You can work at a client site. You can work at a client site permanently. You can work on it, like a GE has the auditors, Ernst & Young, the auditors are always traveling. McKinsey has people on client sites for like 6 months, a year. That is all okay. You can still have an employer-employee relationship. What they don't like is that, again, you sponsor yourself. Like you create your own company and sponsor yourself. They don't want you to be an independent contractor. And they don't like job shops. So I don't know how many of you know that term. Do you know what a job shop is? Yes, it's a placement company, right? So they hire all these tech workers to just work on short contract basis for a variety of whoever needs the work, right? The Immigration Service absolutely does not like the job shop. So I know a lot of job shops get away with it, but there's a lot of denials too. Okay? Now, as I was saying, the employer must pay the H-1B filing fees. What are those fees? Those fees they add up pretty quickly. They're about, well, there's a base filing fee of $325. If your company is small, and that is with 26, less than 26 employees, it's $750 or $1,500 if you're more than 26, plus another $500 for anti-fraud investigation. And then if you want a decision in 2 weeks, as opposed to anywhere from 4 to 6 months, then you need to pay $1,225. Okay, so we're looking at, at a minimum, we're looking at, $1,575 to I'm so bad at math. 2,750, 3,000. We're talking about 4,500 in government filing fees. Okay, and that doesn't include legal fees for the H-1B. All of that again needs to be paid by the employer. All right. Now let's say you find the employer, they're willing to pay you the wage, the job is right, okay, you qualify, the job requires a bachelor's degree, they're willing to pay all the government filing fees, okay, wonderful. Well, I'll tell you what the really big problem is right now with the H-1B, and that is there's an annual limit, okay? So the U.S. government only authorizes every year on October 1, they release 65,000 visas, and then 20,000 for master's students. Now, they release them on October 1, and you can apply 6 months in advance. So that's April 1. And what ends up happening is all these employers are filing the very first day the H-1Bs you can apply for, which is April 1. So then what happens is the government says, okay, we're going to have to run a lottery. Okay, so they're basically running a lottery. And if you have a bachelor's degree, you have like a 27% chance of being selected. Last year, there were over 227,000 H-1B petitions filed for about 80,000, because there's 65,000 plus 20,000 for people with a U.S. master's degree. Are any of you, do any of you have a U.S. master's? Okay, and you guys got the H's? Yeah. Because you guys have a much better chance. It's like a 40% chance. So, if you have a U.S. master's, it's about a 40% chance. If you have a bachelor's, it's about a 27% chance. So chances are not great. There was a great article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about how the 4 or 5 largest Indian tech companies are basically gaming the system. They're filing like 15,000 petitions, right? Can you imagine, like between Infosys, Tata, Wipro, and I think there's one more, Cognizant, they're filing like 60,000. So for the small employer, the small companies, a startup, they're really, to be this organized to file in April for a job that'll can only start in October. This is a real obstacle, okay? Just as a little note, if you're going to go work for a university or if you're going to work for a non-for-profit research organization, then it's cap exempt. So if you get a job at Stanford or Berkeley or wherever, there's no cap, okay? So that's the lottery, that's the H-1B cap if you hear about it. That is the biggest obstacle towards H-1B. And let me tell you, when I first started practicing, the annual number was 195,000. We never had a lottery. We never had a cap. It never ran out. So, and then after 9/11, they shrunk it down to 65,000. And every year, the folks from Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they go to Congress and they're like, please give us more H-1Bs. But Congress just won't do it. So that's the H-1B lottery. Just some nuts and bolts. How much can you work? You can work full-time or part-time. So let's say you are, working with a startup and they want to sponsor you for an H-1B, but they can't pay you the prevailing wage on a full-time basis, you could work for them part-time. You also can hold one part-time and one full-time H-1B. I had one client who had 2 full-time H-1Bs. I don't know how he did it, but he had 2 full-time H-1Bs and he worked. But once you're in the United States on an H-1B, that doesn't mean you can start working for other employers unless you get another H-1B from them. And that H-1B is not subject to the lottery. Okay? So that's how much you can work. Now, a couple of things about how long you can stay on your dependents. You can stay for 6 years in H-1B status and you can extend if your employer has started sponsoring you for permanent residence. Then you can extend beyond the 6 years. So otherwise, it's 6 years. And again, it's been amazing to watch over the last 15 years. When I first started practicing, nobody talked about the permanent residence process until year 3. Now, Amazon and Google, they start sponsoring after 1 month. So it's pretty wild how quickly the green card process is starting now. And even in the last couple of years, I've seen some of my smaller tech company clients push up from 1 year to 6 months. So employers are willing, especially in the tech world, to get moving faster on the permanent residence process. For dependents, this is a real problem with the H-1B, is that the spouses cannot work. So I don't know about, my experience has been that most high-skilled workers are married to other high-skilled workers. So we always have one unhappy spouse. And it's interesting, 8 years ago, I spoke at the UN about trends in labor migration. And this was one of the trends that I said, countries need to give both spouses work authorization, because it's a real, for the United States, this is a real problem for us. But what I do see these savvy spouses end up doing is they end up studying here, they'll get a degree, they go into F1 status, they get OPT, they find someone to sponsor them while they're here. So there are ways. Of course, if you are at a certain stage of the green card process, then your spouse can work. But that's very narrow exception. Okay? All right, so that's the age. Now let's talk about the e-visa for treaty traders and investors. Now this works for, the big thing about the e-visa, the investor visa, is that this is for people who are citizens of a country that has a treaty with the United States. So it doesn't really apply to everybody. The list of e-countries, it's on the Department of State's website. You can just look it up. It's very easy. You can check. So Italy is a country, but India and China are not. Ironically, Pakistan and Iran are, but India and China are not on that list. But for those of you who are nationals of country that does have a treaty with the United States, the investor visa could be a good option for you to start a business in the United States. So long as your business is owned at least 50% by you or a company that is from abroad. Now, there's this option for trade. This is really, if textiles, spices, tires, that's for goods, which is really, I don't know if this really is of interest to you, but the one that most people use is the E2, which is where it's an investment that must be substantial and for a real operating enterprise. What does that mean? It means you can't just invest $50,000 in the US so you can basically hang out, right? I mean, you need to be creating jobs, you need to be generating revenue. Now that doesn't mean that you need to be profitable, because I had a client, she is from an extremely wealthy family. You would know the family name if I said it. And she's from Switzerland, and she wanted to live in New York and have a gallery. And the gallery made no money. But, we extended it every 5 years because, she still was investing money into the gallery, right? Just her own personal money. So it doesn't have to be profitable, but you need to be putting money into the business. You need to be hiring people. So a lot of people say, well, can I work from my home? And I said, that's just, if you're a government officer, would you approve that? You know, you're working from your home. But I have seen, have not been my clients, because I tend to be quite conservative, but I do have I've known of E2s where, you know, they'll start their own like like a fitness training or a personal training business. That's what it was. You know, some woman started her own personal training business, and it can work, but you know, so that's the E. Let me give you a couple of details. First of all, in contrast to the H-1B, the filing fee is just $270, which is very minimal. It's also valid indefinitely. It's just granted in 2-year increments. Now, in my experience, the government usually starts asking around the 10-year mark, like, are you going home? What's going on? With a lot of our firm has a Japan office, and we do the Japanese are the biggest users of the E. Japan and London. The Japanese, you know, they don't plan on living here. They want to go home. So they're pretty, you know, usually the Japanese can stay 15 years here. They own a lot of restaurants and bars. So that's the duration. And then the other bonus is that your spouse can work. So that's the E. Now let's talk about L1 visa for intra-company transferees. This is for those of you who have worked abroad for an international company, or maybe you are your family owns a business that wants to expand internationally. So it's a great visa to transfer talent, okay? Let's just walk through what are the requirements. You need to be transferred to an entity in the United States that is legally related to the entity abroad. Okay, so let's just say Israel. You have a business in Israel, you start or you have an affiliate here, you launch an office in the United States, and the Israeli company is the parent of the US. You can transfer a worker from the Israeli company to the US so long as that employee has worked for your company abroad for at least 1 year. Now, a lot of my international students who are trying to get H-1Bs and cannot get them because of the lottery, right? They'll say, okay, well, I can go back to China and work at a company for a year and then be transferred. They're like, but can I just actually come here on the visitor visa and stay here? It's like, no, they want to see that you have physically worked in that entity abroad. I mean, they're pretty strict. They want to see tax returns. They'll check your entry-exit stamps for the United States, the Immigration Service. I have to tell you, the data mining that the government can do now is wild. It is just getting almost scary, right? How much they can find out about you. So I would just say, so that you have to physically work in your parent or whatever entity abroad for 365 days, okay? And the person has to be coming to work either as an executive, manager, or a worker of specialized knowledge, okay? So that is, the L1 can be a great option if any of those facts apply to you. A couple of just nuts and bolts. The filing fee is $825. If you want a decision in 2 weeks, it's $1,225. There's a 5-year max for L1Bs, specialized knowledge workers, and then there's a 7-year max for L1As, for executives and managers. The thing you should know about for executives and managers is that you also can go to a green card. There's a green card for international managers. Okay, and again, a bonus is your spouses can work. All right, so let's talk about my favorite visa, and that is the O1 for individuals of extraordinary ability. I absolutely love working on this visa petitions. It's for people who have international or national acclaim in the sciences, arts, education, business, or athletics. And you are coming to the U.S. to work in your area of expertise. You have to be working for an employer for the O1, okay? The duration is for 3 years. It is valid indefinitely. You're initially granted 3 years, and then you can renew in 1-year increments. Most people don't even get to that stage unless they are high net worth individuals. Like a lot of the artists, like we used to do for Paul McCartney or Judi Dench. I did a Victoria's Secrets model. So for those people, for a lot of the artists, they're fabulously wealthy and they don't want the tax obligations of the United States. So they prefer to just keep renewing. But for most people, what they'll do is they'll go then to the Extraordinary Ability Green Card. They don't bother renewing. The unfortunate thing is that spouses are not authorized to work. All right, so let's talk about how do you show that you're a person of extraordinary ability? Now, of course, when you start reading the regulations, people often say, oh my gosh, like I've never qualified for this, because the regulation literally says evidence that the beneficiary has received a major internationally recognized award, such as a Nobel Prize, or evidence of at least 3 of the following. So when people read Nobel Prize, they're like, I'm going to stop reading now. And the key thing is, well, okay, yes. I remember Mary Robinson came to our firm. She was the former president of Ireland. She was a UN High Commissioner for Human Rights as well. Yeah, there's people like that. But then there's also just talented young people who I get who we work on O1s for. And the key thing is, even if you don't qualify now, keep this criteria up on your vision board, or just, revisit them every few months. And what you see is a lot of this is about creating opportunities for yourself. I mean, it's kind of like creating your your own PR campaign. But, and I know that sounds cheesy, but it really is about, maybe writing those articles or going to present somewhere or speaking somewhere, just creating opportunities. So let's talk about how you can show that you're an alien of extraordinary ability. So first, you have to show you got a national or international award in your field, okay? Number 2, you have to show published material about you or your work. So if you've been working on really big deals or products, even if your name's not on it, if we can get all that press coverage, it's really helpful. Scholarly articles. Now, scholarly articles, when these regulations were written like 30 years ago, yeah, they thought about peer-reviewed journals. Nobody thought of the internet. Nobody thought about blogs. Nobody knew LinkedIn. But now, I have clients who post on LinkedIn, and they get like 800 views, 1,000 views of their blog content on LinkedIn. So I'll just print that out and highlight, look, she got 1,000 views. She's a real thought leader. The other is being asked to judge the work of others in your field. This is very common, like for business schools, engineering schools. They ask their alums to come back and judge the work of young talent. So this is something a lot of my clients have done. Membership in associations that require outstanding achievements, that's more like, I don't use this very often now, but it's more for like Screen Actors Guild and for artists. Then there's the important and original scientific, scholarly, or business-related contributions. This is where your lawyer really helps you, right? Because what is important and original contribution? I'm going to actually give you an example, and I'll to tie it all in at the end. But that's something, of course, like if you have a patent or a product or an article, yeah. But also, we can show you've made a big difference in the business. I'll give you an example in a minute. The other is you receive a high salary compared to others in your field. And finally, this is one that all my clients show, is employment in a critical role for established organizations. So to tie it all up for you, I'll tell you an O1 I'm working on right now. It's of a young Chinese woman who is a commercial real estate development guru. She has worked for some of the largest publicly traded Chinese real estate companies. She has worked on deals that are worth like anywhere from 10 to $100 million. There's been press coverage on the deals she's worked on. The deals she's worked on in terms of the commercial real estate acquisition, what she has done with it, how they have gentrified neighborhoods, how she has like changed the way a neighborhood looks by bringing in this huge mall or you know, a place. She's really at the cutting edge. She's redefining how the middle class of China consumes, right? I mean, so that's her whole position. She's a extraordinary commercial real estate development professional. And so she has worked in a critical role for established organization. She has made important and original business-related contributions, and she has published material about her work. And that's our petition. So that's the O1. Let me just go over some other visa options really quickly. I might not talk about them if they don't apply. Are any of you from Australia? All right, let's skip this. Are any of you from Canada or Mexico? Let's skip this. All right, this is for those of you, you know, if you're interested, if you're pretty young in your career, like a new graduate, or maybe you've been working for less than 5 years, there is an intern or trainee visa, okay? So this is, you know, but it's not a very long option. It's 12 months to 18 months, okay? And you really have to show that you're gonna go back home and apply whatever experience you received in the United States to your home country, okay? So that is the J1. A lot of startups do use this for just foreign talent. All right, let's quickly talk about President Obama's new International Entrepreneur Parole Program. So what is this? You know, President Obama has wanted to find ways to let international entrepreneurs stay in the United States. One stat that they cited to a lot in the proposed regulation is that of the top 50 VC-funded startups in the US, 48% had at least one immigrant founder. So given the very clear significance of foreign talent, they decide, you know, they've said, all right, well, this is of significant public benefit that we let these people stay. Okay, so what does it take to be considered an international entrepreneur? You have to have established a US startup business in the last 3 years, okay? You have to hold at least a 15% ownership interest. You have to play an active and central role in the operation, so you can't just be a passive investor. And you have to show proof of funding. So let's talk about what kind of funding you need to show. You need to show that you have received at least $345,000 from qualified US investors. Now I'm going to tell you very honestly, in my experience working with most entrepreneurs, they're getting their money from family. Most seed money is coming from, you know, raising funds in family. So, you know, most people are not having qualified investors. And their definition of a qualified investor is pretty intense, I think. You have to, as an investor, you must have made one or more investments in at least 3 different years in the last 5 years, and it has to total $1 million. So you have to be a pretty serious investor. And they have stated explicitly that investors cannot be relatives. The other option is your startup has received $100,000 in government money, federal, state, local, okay? Now, if you don't have $345,000 or you don't have $100,000, you can still apply, but you just have to show that there's real rapid growth and job creation available, you know, that your company shows the potential for just rapid growth and job creation, okay? So what is parole status, right? People are like, well, is that a visa? What is that? It is not a visa. It is a legal entry into the United States. You're given an I-94. It'll show PE. And it does not allow you to have any kind of path to permanent residence. you're entitled to apply for different kinds of green card options, but there's no direct route to permanent residence, okay? Let's talk about filing procedure, just some nuts and bolts. It's initially for 2 years, and then you can extend for another 3 years for a maximum 5 years. There's a $1,200 filing fee. And here's the big thing. Even though there is no minimum salary requirement for the entrepreneur's household income needs to be more than 400% the poverty lines. So I just give you an example. If it's just, the entrepreneur and his or her spouse, they have to show an household income of $80,000. If it's a spouse, the entrepreneur and the child, it's $1,800. If it's 4, it's that much. Now, the good thing is the spouse can work, and the spouse's income can go towards showing that household income, okay? Now, here I think is really tough. It's like if you can get an extension for the remaining 3 years, if the startup continues to operate, you continue to pay a central role, it can be reduced to 10% ownership interest, and the startup has created at least 10 full-time jobs, or received more funding, at least $500,000, or generated significant revenue of at least $500,000 annually. And I'll be very honest with you, most startups I work with do not have this kind of figures at year 3, So this is pretty tough to show, I think. And frankly, I think if you can show all this, then you might as well go for the extraordinary ability visa and the other thing I was going to say about the extraordinary ability visa, which I didn't talk about actually, is that is a visa where you can start your own company and sponsor yourself. Okay, so if you are an entrepreneur, so I had a client, actually she came to a meetup, that's how I met her. She is this event planner for particular kinds of, do you guys know that whole film, like the vampire films, what is the big cult following? Anyway,
Twilight?
Yes, Twilight. So this whole sort of vampire, Dracula, she organizes events around Twilight and that subculture, which drew like thousands and thousands of people. So she was this extraordinary event planner. And so she had all these agents and actors, everybody write these letters, which I drafted, and it was really fun. But yeah, so she started her own company and sponsored herself. So you can do that with the O, okay? Just really quickly, as I mentioned, the spouse and children can come. The spouse can work, and of course, everybody can study. Couple of limitations. I have just a few minutes left to go. There can be no more than 3 entrepreneurs per startup entity. There's no appeal or denial, and parole status can be revoked at any time, okay? So they can be revoked at any time if the startup stops working or is no longer of significant public benefit. So there's no court proceeding, there's no removal hearing, you're not really protected, it's just revoked and you are asked to leave, okay? Just in terms of when will this take effect, because of course President Obama's presidency is coming to an end in November. Right now they released the rule on August 31. Individuals and companies or organizations have 45 days now to provide comments on the proposed rule. Then what happens is the Department of Homeland Security will read all those comments, factor them in, and issue a final rule. And once that is done, then the rule takes effect. So could it be done by November? I don't know. But the truth is, if Hillary Clinton is elected, this will go through. If Trump is elected, I don't know if he'll even understand it. But I guess it's funny. I spent 5 years with the federal government where we were never allowed to talk about which president we liked or not. We were never allowed to talk about politics. So it's so nice that now I can share openly what I think. Okay, so avenues for permanent residence. We're just going to do a quick one slide. There's really 5 major ways to get a green card. The first is employment. You know, I've sort of hinted at extraordinary ability, international manager, if an employer sponsors you, there's all these employment-based ways. There's also family. So if any of you, I know some of you are here as visitors, if you meet the love of your life and he or she happens to be a US citizen, that's like your golden ticket to a green card. But also if you don't fall in love but have family, definitely, that was my case. My uncle, because of my uncle, you know, we came in. There's the diversity visa lottery. That is for nationals of or citizens of countries that are not heavily represented in the United States. So, you know, India, China, they're nationals of these countries. Yeah, they are highly represented. It's for, you know, even the UK, Canada, Mexico. These are countries that are not allowed. What they think of, you know, Angola or Liberia or, you know, I think some of the, you know, Bolivia, things like this. So that's the diversity visa lottery. I think Italians can apply. I have to double check. Every year they do release what nationals can apply and not. The other way is asylum. Now this is really, you come here, you're a student here, you work here for a while and you're afraid to go home. I have clients I help with in this case. You know, there are people who come, they convert or change religions, they discover their sexual orientation. There's also just things in their home country go really bad. So there's asylum. And then, of course, there's the $1 Million Green Card. The biggest users of the $1 Million Green Card are the Chinese. There's about 8,500, or I think maybe there's like 10,000 visas given a year. And last year, 8,400 were by Chinese nationals. And then the next country was South Korea with like 170. So it's just to show how much the Chinese are, how much capital the Chinese are infusing into the United States. Just a quick little, once you get your green card, 5 years later, you can apply for citizenship. If you get your green card because you're married to a US citizen, that golden ticket is still going because you can get citizenship in 3 years. Okay? So likelihood of immigration reform, this is going to be just, there's nothing to say. You know, it just doesn't, it's just not a real priority for either candidate. Well, for Trump, it's like I said, it's the wall or not letting any Muslims in. And then for Clinton, you know, I think she definitely supports Silicon Valley and wants more visas for high-skilled workers, but we'll see how it turns out. It's just not high on her agenda. I mean, wouldn't you guys agree from just watching? I mean, right now she's dealing with those pneumonia accusations, so it's like, right? So, okay. Just a couple of things to think about. Common obstacles. Okay, so a couple of things to think about. Have any of you had J1s? The trainee, you have had a J1. So one thing that could apply to you is a 2-year home residency requirement. If you get if you get government funding, if you are working in an area that your country wants you to come home and work in, there's a 2-year home residency requirement. People often don't even know that they're subject. And they just don't realize. They're like, oh, I just got this scholarship, I get to come to the US, and they don't realize they have to go home for 2 years. So that's a 2-year home residency requirement. The other thing is, if you've previously overstayed, just want to be careful. You can overstay your visa in the United States up to 179 days, and there's no real consequence except you always have to apply for your visa in your home country. Right? I mean, and so that means if you're, you can't apply in Canada if you're Indian. You always have to go back to India, right? But if you overstay more than 180 days, then you are not allowed to return to the United States for 3 years. And if you overstay by a year, you are not allowed to return for 10 years. So you just want to be really careful about watching the time on how much time you've been given on your visa, okay? A couple of other things is if you have been convicted of an offense a very long time ago and you've just forgotten, I'm telling you, the data mining now, the database sharing among countries and the data mining in the United States, records are going back further and further. And so you can mark on your visa application, I've never been arrested. I've never been convicted of anything. And you go in for your biometrics, which most of you probably have done, your fingerprints, it'll pop up. And then they're going to say, well, you have this conviction or you have this arrest and you lied. So they're definitely going to deny you at that point. So you just want to be really careful. So if anything has happened, even if it was just an arrest and the charges were dropped, you're going to have to always disclose it. The last thing I want to say, if you're here in the United States and you get charged with an offense, or you get, if you get arrested or you get charged or you get convicted, before you get convicted, it's very important that you talk to an immigration attorney, because the consequences of whatever you plead guilty to can be really enormous, okay? Because the immigration statute they have a list of crimes for which they can remove you that are very broad. So you want to make sure you always talk to an immigration attorney. And look, life happens. People get stopped for driving under influence. People get in fights at bars. Couples get in fights. That's some of my most common convictions and arrests are around domestic violence. And then there's drugs, right? So this, like I said, life happens. We all make mistakes, but you definitely want to talk to an immigration attorney if anything like that does happen. But on that note, but I know you guys are all international entrepreneurs and you're probably not getting in trouble that way. So on that note, I just want to wish you lots of luck. And, if you have questions or concerns, feel free to email me. What I normally do is I see if it's worth it for you to have a consultation with me, and then we can schedule something. But yeah, please feel free. I know it's to contact me. I know it's a lot of information. So.
I have a question, like a dummies. If you are here with the visa waiver, you can become an employee. You can work here. You can't work here.
Correct.
But you can open a company here or not?
Correct. You can.
Okay. Thank you.
You will have some challenges around opening a bank account, getting a taxpayer identification number. So the best thing to do is maybe have a friend who can help you, or maybe do a little research on how to do all that. Get a taxpayer identification number before opening your company. But absolutely, people do it all the time on the visitor visa.
So if you're on H-1B and you get laid off, what is the grace period in which you have to leave the country?
Okay, great question, and that always comes up. The grace period, there's no real grace period. There's like a 10-day, they say, but the way it works is, you have about 10 days to leave. What most people do is they do end up staying, looking for jobs, and trying to do a transfer of their H-1B to a new employer. And if you get your transfer in about a month, the government may not notice that you have a pay stub missing, because they want to see all your pay stubs. So the answer is 10 days under the law. In practice, you could probably go for a few weeks if you get another employer. Now, what my clients do, if the reason why you get laid off is because there's a huge economic bust, right? So it's not going to be easy to get another job like after 9/11. What my clients would usually do is change their status to visitor. So that buys them 6 months in the United States. And they're not worrying. Okay?
Over here. So if you're on L1A and your spouse then is on L2 and you're working for a large international company, can you and your spouse start a startup on the site in California?
Yes, you can. You can start a startup. The only thing is you cannot be an employee. You, the L1A, cannot be the employee of the startup.
Hi, can I just check the E2, like how much is the ballpark investment?
Yeah,
I know
great
that's a common
question. Yeah, everyone wants to know, is there a number? There's no magic number. It's not like the investor, international entrepreneur, where they clearly say 345,000 or 100,000. There's nothing like that. It just depends on your business, what makes sense. What we see is like 100 to 200,000, is like a good place to start. Some people have gotten away with less, but then it just comes up with your business plan.
We can get two visas under.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, when we can get two E2 visas under,
If both are nationals of the treaty country.
and it would be the same company.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
Thanks.
Hi. We are from Turkey, and we just established our company in here 2 months ago as a startup. We also have a company in Turkey, and we want to open as a part of. We also carry our company to here for L1, but we are the founders, our company, and we are not looking at the workers in our Turkey company. So is it available to apply L1 visa?
Yeah, great question. And so you are not an employee.
But also we have had a lot of.
Family business actually. It's making profit, etc. And even we have, we have U.S. companies like Qualcomm and Mastercard in our company list, but we do not actually working in our company.
Yeah, so you wouldn't qualify.
So we own the company. We have to work for it at least 1 year.
Correct. You have to be employed. So you have to show pay stubs. You have to show tax returns.
Okay. One more question.
Yeah.
For O1, do we have to? You didn't tell anything about if you don't have a bachelor degree, but have 12 years experience, work experience. In that case, how do you verify our experience?
So you're talking about the H-1B?
No, O1.
O1, you don't need a degree.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. The degree, they don't care. I mean, that's how most, so many artists don't have it. But for the H-1B, yes, you have to show 12 years of work experience to show you have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. And it's verified by getting employer letters, and then there's an evaluation agency that reads all those letters and writes an evaluation. But for the O1, it doesn't matter.
Hi. Can we apply for an O1 while being on H1B?
Absolutely.
And then you can transfer to O1. And is there a limit to O1 visa?
Nope.
Okay.
No cap, and you can absolutely apply for
Any
the.
time of the year?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. USCI's website has this thing called Entrepreneurial Pathways, and it says for me, you can come to US on B1 to explore starting up, but is there any restriction about using B1 for this purpose? For example, the duration, the gap between the visits. Mm-hmm. Do they have any specific rules?
They don't have specific rules. It's a great question. I have clients who are coming in and out who are basically have been living here for 2 years. They come for 90 days on the visa waiver program. They leave. They go back to Norway for 2 weeks. They come back for another 90 days. They go back for 3-4 weeks. Come back. So there's no rule. It's just when the officer says, "Gosh, you've been coming an awful lot. What are you doing? And how are you affording to stay in the U.S. so much?"
So it's always the POE, port of entry thing you have to manage.
Correct. That's exactly right.
I'm on third year. I'm coming here on B1 on third year. This is my third year.
Third year. Yeah, but you come, for 6 months at a time, or?
I've done multiple ways, 2 months, sometimes 6 months last year. After that, I took 8-9 months a gap. So I was worried. I didn't want to get stopped.
Yeah.
So now I'm planning 2 months because I'm really working on fundraising now. So I don't want a longer gap. But yeah, I always felt
Yeah.
POE is very different interview process every time.
Correct. That's absolutely right. You want to avoid small airports. Like you don't want to fly into Cincinnati. You want to stay with SFO and JFK. The other thing is you want to always have a return ticket home. And you don't want business cards showing you have an address in the U.S. They can ask to look in your suitcase. So pack your suitcase or your, laptop or iPad carefully. Otherwise, it sounds like you're doing the right thing. I mean, it doesn't sound like you're working here. So yeah, I would just always, when you talk with the officers at the airport, just show them that you have a return ticket home and that you've always followed the law and you will continue to do so.
So if you're starting a company and your co-founder is a U.S. citizen, can he file for your H-1B transfer? I mean, can he? So I'm on H-1B, but say when I join that company as a founder or co-founder, can he sponsor my transfer of H-1B or?
If you're a co-founder,
I mean,
no.
he's a co-founder, but a U.S. citizen, for example.
Yeah, but so what's important is how much ownership interest you have. So if you're a co-founder, it doesn't matter whether you have a U.S. citizen co-founder or not. You're an owner of the company, so you're not entitled to an H-1B.
But if he has a larger stake than mine, say 51% is him and 49 is mine.
No. Then you're still, it's got to be small. Your ownership interest has to be really small.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
When you're on a H-1B, and at what point can you decide to work full time on your company, and on which visa can you work on it?
Okay, so if you're on H-1B and you want to work on your company, you can do that at any time. You just cannot be employed by your company. Okay?
I mean, so you cannot leave the current job that you're on, but can you leave your current job and just work on your startup continuously?
If you change your status to B1, sure. But you can't just quit your job and hang out and work on your business because you're technically here in H-1B status, but you're not complying with the terms of your status.
So if you are in the process of your green card and you got your I-140, when you change to a different employer, how does that 140 affect?
Okay, that's more complicated, and we can talk about that later because yeah. I'm not sure what the question is, but also it's very specific.
Coming back to the H-1B grace period that you talked about, you also mentioned that if your visa expires, you can stay for 179 days.
If your status expires? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how is that different from when you lose a job on H-1B? Is that the same?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is different. What the 180 days is unlawful presence. Unlawful presence starts counting the day your I-94 expires, right? You're unlawfully present. If you are in H-1B status, but you are terminated and you're staying in the United States, you're not unlawfully present because you entered legally and you have a valid I-94, so you're not unlawfully present. You're just not complying, you're out of status, meaning you're not complying with the terms of your status. It's nuanced difference. But the 180 days, that clock doesn't start ticking.
Okay.
You're not allowed to just not maintain status.
Also, what is the minimum number of hours you can be on an H-1B if you're on a part-time H-1B?
20. I'd say 20.
Not less than 20?
You could try, I just don't think you'll succeed.
Okay.
They don't have it set in the law, but 20 is what makes sense, right? To be a part-time job. It could be 18, I guess, but I don't know if it'll succeed.
Okay.
So you clarified that any individual on H-1B, they can't start their own company. But I had conflicting approach where you can actually start your own company and have an independent board who can actually fire you, in which case you can actually start your own company and work for it. So do you have any, is that right?
Well, then you're saying you're not a controlling shareholder. You cannot have a majority interest if you have you could have a board and argue that, yeah, even though you have a 60% interest or 45% ownership interest, the board could fire you. Is the government going to really believe that? I mean,
I don't want to just pass anecdotal evidence, but just one quick example is there's a company called Genefits, where one of the founders is Indian and one of the co-founders is American. And he actually works for the same company. So that's one example that was quoted, where the board has independent authority to fire the CEO. But that's an argument that was made.
sorry?
That's an argument that was made. So that's an argument that was made by some online forums. And it was said that USC has clarified on that rule that if you have an independent board, even though you have majority stake in your own company, but if you have an independent board, then it's okay.
Well, I just think that's, in my personal opinion, that's kind of like artificial. You can't be a majority shareholder and have an independent board that can fire you.
Right.
I mean, like corporate, that's like not, doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
So
I do agree.
Yeah.
I do agree.
So if you are an H1 with a couple of dependents and you want to start your own company, you said you can switch to a visitor visa, B1.
If you don't want to work anymore and you want to just devote yourself to your business, yeah,
like
that's
for next
the
6 months, then you yourself and your dependents could be on B1. Like
Absolutely.
You don't have to show any support, like financial support.
Oh yeah,
or
you do. I mean, you could do it, but then the question becomes, how do you qualify? Yeah, you would have to show you have enough money in the bank
Okay.
to live in the United States for 6 months.
Okay, and for visitors visa, someone is outside US and they want to come on visitors visa. Do they need someone inviting them, like we do invite our parents? Like, do they have a hook in the US who would invite them
For a visitor visa?
for a visitor
Yeah,
visa?
you generally need to have an invitation, either from a family or friend or university or
And
employer.
B1 is different. Like B1 doesn't need a invitation.
Sure, it does.
It does. So he.
Yeah, in my case, I used the case of entrepreneurial pathway. I said like, no, I'm just coming here to explore. I didn't have any invitation first time when I came.
Right. So if if you can show that you have a clear agenda of starting your own business, you don't need. You can get away with not having an invitation letter. You must have had a very strong case in other ways, like either you must show great bank statements and maybe an employment history, or So, but generally, you.
There were a lot of questions about the startup.
Yeah.
what was
Okay.
it like. It was 1 hour interview, so.
Yeah. So
they're
I
ready
would.
to go through it, like, no issue.
Right. So the way to avoid that risk of a 1 hour interview that could go wrong and you have a denial is, well, you want an invitation letter, even if it's from, but if it's very narrow and it is you want to have a startup, you could try. The thing is, they're often worried at the consulates that you're just really coming to find work.
You mentioned about uncle, sponsoring a residency or something, like, no, is it still on?
But the wait
You
now,
didn't
it's
mention
like,
that.
yeah.
I have my brother who's a green card guy. Can he help me in getting into US?
No,
through
it has to be a
different
U.S. citizen. Once he becomes a U.S. citizen, he can sponsor you. You probably have, I can check. Hold on. Let me see. Maybe I can check. Oh, by the way, here's the website for the wage. Do you guys want to do the wage thing?
Yeah.
Search wizard, really quickly. Here we go. Let's look up California. Let's do Santa Clara County, because that's like, or San Francisco, which is one of the highest paid counties in the country. What would you guys like to look at? What kind of role? Should we do a computer role? How about we do a software developer? Should we do that? So the starting salary is 80,000. Next salary is 98,000. It's not so bad, right? Okay, so let me show you now the visa bulletin for your question about the uncle. Okay, so that's the F4, okay, family 4. So are you from India?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, it's a 15-year wait. Check out Philippines. It's 93.
Oh,
India, China.
except those of you.
So yeah, you have about a 15 to 6, which is, so that's what I was
You
saying.
can apply for it, but you can keep on doing the other visas, travel and all that. Right? While you are on this.
Yeah, you can be sponsored, and then you just they'll say, have you ever been sponsored for an immigrant visa? You have to say yes, but you have to say, I'm the brother of a U.S. citizen. I have a 15-year wait. I want to go and visit the U.S.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what I was saying. Even a long time ago, for my dad, I wasn't even born. So when my dad was sponsored, and it took us I was 11 when I came to the U.S. Mm-hmm. That's the brother or sister of a U.S. citizen.
Oh, okay. And that's which category?
F4.
F4? Oh, F4. Okay. Got it.
Those are the different categories.
Okay.
Yes. Do you want to? Mm-hmm.
Can someone on F1 or OPT start a company? Because that's a complete different criteria, right?
If you're on F1, you can start OPT. You can absolutely start your own company.
But on F1, you can start and work for the company, right?
You cannot work. You cannot be employed.
Okay, but on OPT you can.
Correct.
Okay, so that's like 3 years.
Well, no, not for the STEM OPT.
STEM is 12 months plus 29 months, right?
So STEM is 12. So OPT is 1 year. If you want to start your own business and work on OPT, that's permissible.
Okay.
For the extra 2-year extension, which is the STEM OPT, you cannot be self-employed.
Oh, okay.
You need an employer.
Okay.
Like a proper employer. They're very strict about that.
Okay.
What visa holders can start a company? I mean, is there you need, like, for example, an H-1B or H-4, is there a restriction on certain visa types for someone trying to start a company? Or?
No, anyone can start a company. You just can't be employed.
Sure, but does it mean that there doesn't need to be any U.S. citizen who has to be a co-founder? There is no, such a requirement at all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, logistically, there's no legal requirement. Now, logistically, it might make your life easier for purposes of opening a bank account, things like that. But if you're an H-1B, you already have a social security number.
Right.
So then you're able to open a bank account.
Okay. And for family-based green card, what qualifies as family?
Okay,
Is
so
it
it's right
immediate
here.
family?
Yeah. So this is the categories. Unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, spouse, children, and unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents, married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, and then brothers and sisters of adult U.S. citizens.
Got it. And under EB-5, there is a $500,000 investment program.
Mm-hmm. That's for places that are low income, so underdeveloped.
Okay, and there is one more program that's related to funding government projects. It's not the rural program, but there is a third thing that I have been hearing about.
I unfortunately don't know about that one. I'm sorry.
Okay. And let's say you started your own company. Can you be employed at another company as a part-time H-1B employee?
Yeah, so long as you're not employed by your
Sure.
own company.
But
you
it can be a part-time H-1B as well, a 20-hour job.
Correct, absolutely.
Oh, I see. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your company should not have any conflict of interest thing clause, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's not really immigration issue, that's
But
more
that's the
business law,
company
but
issue.
yeah.
Okay.
So what's the success rate for L1A? What are the chances of getting a rejection of L1A?
Oh gosh, it depends. It's very hard to say. Okay, I will tell you this now that you ask. They did a study. because Indians are denied at a very high rate. So if you're Indian, you're in a different category for L1s. For L1As and L1Bs. L1Bs, Indians have a 56% deny rate. The rest of the world has about a 13%. For international managers and executives, again, for Indians, it's in the high 30s or 40s. With other nationals, again, like 20%.
Okay.
Yeah, so the chances are good, but generally, the requirements are strict, so it's kind of self-selecting. You know what I mean?
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, you want to go first?
Excuse me, will you be sharing the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, if you email me, I'd be happy to email it to you. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I have two questions. The first is with the new kind of visa if passed, how much time to switch your visa to startup visa? How much time you have?
You can't switch. What you're saying, if you enter on the visa waiver program?
In a case that in a future I have a fundraise for 1 million, 2 million, or something. How much time I can have this kind of visa?
Yeah, so it's yes, I'm not understanding. So you are asking how much time it takes to get it?
Yes, how much time to be... okay, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If I will have a fundraise, okay, and this new law is accepted, how much time I can have this visa from the fundraise to the visa?
Okay, well, we don't have any idea because there's no examples. It's never been,
okay.
right? I mean, it hasn't even been implemented, so we don't know how long the government's going to take.
Okay, and for issue, do you have to a business plan for issue, and how much money do you have for starting an issue program, and in your planning or issue, so you self-found is an investor, can you insert a VC fundraise, or you have to pay your company for a lot of years with your money for this visa?
Okay, so for the E2, this was a question earlier also about how much money. There's no number. It just has to make sense for your business. So it really, whatever your business, if you're buying a restaurant versus if you're buying a little gelato shop, it just depends. Are you buying a factory? Okay, but then insofar as how much money, yeah, they want to, again, it just depends on how many people you're going to have. So if you are hiring 3-4 people, and they're going to want to see that you have enough money. So I can't give you like a number. It's just, that's just
no, but I don't want the number. I want to understand if in this planning I plan an investor round.
Oh, by the way, you can't have U.S. funding for the E2. It has to be Italian money.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any idea how much is the possibility of this program getting through?
I think there's a very high likelihood. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be exactly how it's been proposed, but yeah, I think it has a high likelihood.
Awesome.
I heard there was some change in the law recently. If you have an H-1B and your priority date is still stuck and you have an approved 140 of some kind, you can get an EAD.
Your spouse can.
But the person who's on the H-1B cannot get a EAD for if you've been on it for a long time and your priority is not true? Okay.
It's only your spouse.
Any more questions for Nadia? All right, let's hear it for Nadia.